The airport was buzzing with its usual chaos, passengers rushing through terminals, announcements echoing overhead, and staff working tirelessly to keep everything running smoothly. Among the crowd, a well-dressed man walked confidently towards the private jet terminal. He exuded calm and quiet authority, his tailored suit and polished shoes a subtle testament to his success. His name was Marcus Bellamy, a name few recognized, but one that carried immense weight in the business world. A self-made billionaire, Marcus was no stranger to luxury, but his humble beginnings had taught him to value respect over wealth. At the private jet lounge, the polished floors reflected the soft glow of overhead lights. Marcus approached the check-in desk, holding his boarding pass and a warm, easy smile. But the moment he stepped forward, the atmosphere shifted. A flight attendant, poised and impeccably dressed in her crisp uniform, glanced at him and immediately seemed to bristle. Her name tag read Emily, and her demeanor was professional, at least on the surface. Emily's eyes flickered to Marcus, her gaze lingering a little too long on his face before she looked him up and down, almost imperceptibly. Then came the hesitation, the kind that spoke volumes. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone neutral but edged with something colder. "This lounge is reserved for passengers boarding private flights." Marcus, unfazed, extended his boarding pass with the same calm smile. "I understand," he said. "I'm on flight 8790. Departure in an hour." Emily didn't reach for the boarding pass. Instead, her eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "This area is for private jet passengers only." A few people nearby glanced in their direction, sensing the tension. Marcus noticed but remained composed. He'd been in situations like this before, where people judged him not by his achievements or character, but by the color of his skin. He didn't let it rattle him. "I'm quite sure," Marcus replied, keeping his tone steady. He gestured to the sleek Gulfstream G700 jet visible through the glass wall. "That's my plane." Emily hesitated again, her professionalism beginning to falter. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said curtly. "This isn't a commercial flight. These jets are privately owned or chartered by specific clients." Her words were carefully chosen, but the implication was clear. Someone like Marcus couldn't possibly be the owner of such an aircraft. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but stayed calm. "I assure you, there's no misunderstanding," he said. "If you check my name on the passenger list, I believe you'll find everything in order." Instead of doing as he suggested, Emily glanced around, as if looking for backup. Her voice grew firmer, more clipped. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside while I verify this. Please wait over there." She pointed to a less visible corner of the lounge, a place that felt more like a waiting area for those deemed unworthy of immediate attention. Marcus's jaw tightened for the briefest moment. He was no stranger to being underestimated, but every time it happened, it stung just the same. Still, he nodded politely and stepped aside, determined not to cause a scene. As he moved, he caught sight of the other passengers in the lounge, mostly older, mostly white, watching him with a mix of curiosity and unease. As he stood waiting, Marcus allowed his mind to drift back to the journey that had brought him here. Growing up in a small, working-class neighborhood, luxury had been an alien concept. His mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and his father, a factory worker, taught him the value of hard work and integrity. Marcus had always dreamed big, not just for himself, but for the people he cared about. He had poured himself into his education, earning scholarships and working odd jobs to make it through college. Emily turned to her colleague, whispering in hushed tones. Her gestures were quick, almost frantic, as if she were trying to confirm her suspicions without openly admitting them. Marcus stood by, hands in his pockets, watching the scene unfold with a calm that belied the tension simmering beneath the surface. 2 minutes later, everything changed. Emily's whispered conversation grew more animated. Her colleague, a young man with a hesitant expression, glanced between her and Marcus, clearly unsure how to proceed. The The seconds ticked by, the tension in the room palpable. Marcus remained composed, though his patience was starting to wear thin. He checked his watch, noting that the flight was scheduled to depart soon. Every moment wasted here felt unnecessary, but he decided to give them the benefit of the doubt. After years of climbing the corporate ladder and eventually venturing into entrepreneurship, Marcus had built a global business empire. His focus on renewable energy and sustainable technology had earned him both respect and fortune. But even with all his accomplishments, moments like this served as a reminder of the biases that still lingered. Marcus's thoughts were interrupted by Emily's voice, sharper now as she addressed her colleague. "Just call the jet company and verify," she said, her frustration evident. The young man hesitated, then nodded and reached for the phone. Emily turned her gaze back to Marcus, her expression unreadable, but her body language defensive. While they waited for the call to go through, a well-dressed couple entered the lounge. The man, wearing a tailored blazer, gave Marcus a curious glance before turning to Emily. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his tone friendly but with an undertone of concern. Emily straightened up, eager to regain control of the situation. "Just a minor verification," she said smoothly. "We'll sort it out shortly." The man nodded and turned his attention back to Marcus. "You here for business or leisure?" he asked, striking up a conversation. Marcus smiled politely. "A bit of both," he replied, heading to a conference first, then taking a few days to relax. The man seemed intrigued. "What kind of conference?" "Renewable energy," Marcus said simply. Before the conversation could continue, Emily's colleague hung up the phone and approached her, his expression uncertain. He whispered something in her ear that made her eyes widen briefly before she quickly masked her reaction. She turned back to Marcus, her demeanor stiff but slightly subdued. "Well, it seems everything is in order after all," she said, her voice tight. "You're clear to board." Marcus didn't miss the shift in her tone or the reluctance in her words. He nodded graciously and retrieved his boarding pass. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady but with a subtle firmness that conveyed he hadn't missed the earlier disrespect. As he walked past Emily toward the jet, he could feel the weight of the other passengers' gazes on him. Some looked curious, others awkwardly averted their eyes. It was a scene he'd experienced before, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken dynamics at play. The Gulfstream jet was even more stunning up close. Its sleek design and polished exterior gleamed under the sunlight streaming through the terminal windows. Marcus climbed the short set of stairs and entered the cabin, where a cheerful flight attendant greeted him warmly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bellamy," she said with a smile. "Welcome aboard. Can I get you something to drink before we take off?" Marcus's mood lifted slightly at the warmth in her tone. "Just water for now, thank you," he said as he settled into one of the plush leather seats. As he glanced out the window, he saw Emily still standing near the lounge entrance, her expression unreadable. She seemed to be speaking to another staff member, gesturing toward the jet. Marcus turned away, deciding to focus on the upcoming flight and let the incident fade into the background. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about this interaction would linger. It wasn't just about him, it was about what moments like these represented. The subtle, often unspoken barriers that people like him faced, even in spaces they had every right to occupy. The engines rolled to life, and the jet began its taxi toward the runway. As the cabin filled with the soft hum of anticipation, Marcus leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes, preparing for the journey ahead. He didn't know it yet, but the events of the day were far from over. Somewhere in the background, the wheels of karma were beginning to turn, and what happened next would catch everyone, especially Emily, completely off guard. As the jet ascended into the sky, Marcus gazed out the window, watching the city shrink beneath him. The day's events swirled in his mind, leaving a faint bitterness he couldn't quite shake. He was used to navigating spaces where he wasn't always welcomed, but every new encounter felt like another subtle jab, a reminder that respect wasn't always freely given. No matter how much one achieved, the flight attendant returned with his water, her smile warm and genuine. "If there's anything else you need during the flight, just let me know," she said before retreating to the galley. Marcus thanked her, appreciating her professionalism and kindness, a stark contrast to the earlier confrontation. As the plane cruised above the clouds, Marcus pulled out his laptop, intent on preparing for the conference ahead. It was a major event in the renewable energy sector, one where leaders from around the world would discuss groundbreaking innovations. Marcus had been invited to deliver the keynote speech, an honor that reflected his standing in the industry. As the plane cruised above the clouds, Marcus pulled out his laptop, intent on preparing for the conference ahead. It was a major event in the renewable energy sector, one where leaders from around the world would discuss groundbreaking innovations. Marcus had been invited to deliver the keynote speech, an honor that reflected his standing in the industry. He had spent years building his company into a global force, championing clean energy solutions and advocating for sustainable practices. Yet moments like the one at the terminal reminded him that no level of success could shield him from certain prejudices. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Emily was still grappling with the aftermath of her encounter with Marcus. She paced nervously near the lounge, replaying the incident in her mind. Something about the way Marcus had carried himself, the calm confidence, the lack of anger, unsettled her. She knew she had misjudged him, and now the reality of her actions was beginning to sink in. The phone call her colleague had made to verify Marcus's credentials had revealed not only that he owned the jet, but also that he was one of the wealthiest and most respected figures in the business world. The realization left her feeling embarrassed and exposed. Emily's supervisor, a stern woman named Claire, approached her with a clipboard in hand. "Emily, can I speak with you for a moment?" Claire's tone was firm but not unkind. Emily followed her to a quieter corner of the lounge, her heart pounding. "I received a report about the interaction with Mr. Bellamy," Claire began, her eyes scanning Emily's face. "Care to explain what happened?" Emily hesitated, searching for the right words. I didn't realize who he was," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought he might have been in the wrong place." Claire raised an eyebrow. "And what made you think that? Did he do or say something inappropriate?" Emily shook her head quickly. "No, nothing like that. It's just, I wasn't expecting someone like him to be a passenger on a private jet." Claire's expression hardened. "Emily, we don't make assumptions about our passengers, no matter who they are or what they look like. Our job is to provide excellent service to everyone, period. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Emily replied, her cheeks flushing with shame. She knew she had crossed a line, and Claire's words only confirmed what she already feared. She had let her biases get the better of her. Claire sighed, her tone softening slightly. "We're in the business of hospitality, Emily. Moments like these can define a passenger's entire experience. I need you to reflect on this and make sure it doesn't happen again." Emily nodded, grateful that the conversation hadn't escalated further. But as Claire walked away, she couldn't shake the gnawing guilt that clung to her. She wondered if Marcus would report her behavior, or if the incident would come back to haunt her career. For the first time, she realized how much damage a single moment of judgment could cause, not just to her, but to the person on the receiving end. Back on the jet, Marcus received an email notification on his phone. It was from his assistant, detailing the final itinerary for the conference. Scanning through the schedule, he noticed an unfamiliar name listed as a panelist, someone he hadn't worked with before. Intrigued, he made a mental note to look them up later. The email also included a personal message. "Remember, Marcus, you belong in every room you walk into. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." The words brought a faint smile to his lips, a reminder of the support system that had always stood by him. The flight was smooth, but Marcus couldn't fully relax. His thoughts kept drifting back to the terminal, to Emily's hesitant gaze and the subtle but unmistakable sting of her doubt. He wondered if she regretted her actions, or if she had simply dismissed him as an anomaly. Part of him wanted to confront her, to challenge her assumptions directly. But another part knew that doing so wouldn't change much. Actions like hers were symptoms of a larger issue, one that required more than a single conversation to address. As the plane began its descent, Marcus packed away his laptop and prepared for landing. He reminded himself that his focus needed to remain on the conference, on the work that truly mattered. Yet, a small part of him couldn't help but feel that the story wasn't over, that the events of the day were setting the stage for something bigger, something he couldn't yet foresee. In the airport on the other end of the journey, Marcus was greeted with the same polished professionalism he had come to expect from the private aviation staff. There were no lingering glances, no subtle hesitations, just the seamless service he had paid for. But even as he stepped into the awaiting car, his mind lingered on Emily and the moment that had almost soured his day. Sometimes, it wasn't the overt challenges that stayed with you. It was the quiet moments, the subtle interactions that left you questioning how far society had really come. Marcus resolved to keep moving forward, knowing that the best way to challenge assumptions was to keep proving them wrong. Through action, through success, and through the quiet dignity that no one could take away. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. The sleek black car moved steadily through the bustling city streets, carrying Marcus toward the towering hotel where the conference was set to take place. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the skyline, but Marcus barely noticed the beauty outside. His thoughts were elsewhere, replaying the events of the day. The encounter at the terminal, Emily's doubtful gaze, and the quiet but persistent sting of being underestimated, they lingered like shadows in his mind. As the car approached the hotel, Marcus received a text from one of his business associates, Angela, a key figure in the renewable energy world and someone whose opinion he valued deeply. The message read, "Excited to see you at the dinner tonight. Heard there's someone new on the panel causing quite a stir. Can't wait to hear your take. Marcus frowned slightly, intrigued but wary. He had been preparing for this conference for months, ensuring every detail was in place. A disruptive presence on the panel wasn't ideal, but Marcus trusted Angela's instincts. If she thought it was worth noting, it likely was. Stepping into the Grand Hotel lobby, Marcus was immediately greeted by staff who knew him by name. They escorted him to the private reception, where some of the most influential figures in the industry were mingling. The atmosphere was lively but charged with the quiet intensity of people who held power and knew it. As Marcus entered, heads turned, and a wave of recognition passed through the room. He was accustomed to this, the subtle shift in energy when he arrived, a mix of respect, curiosity, and sometimes envy. Angela spotted him and made her way over, her warm smile a welcome sight. "Marcus," she said, embracing him lightly. "You look sharp as always, ready to take on the panel tomorrow." "Always," he replied, his tone light but confident. "Though your message has me curious. What's this about a stir on the panel?" Angela chuckled, lowering her voice. "There's a new face, Elliot Reynolds. He's young, ambitious, and not afraid to shake things up. Word is he's been making bold claims about the future of the industry. Some people are excited, others are less thrilled." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. He appreciated fresh perspectives, but boldness without substance could be a dangerous combination. He made a mental note to keep an eye on Reynolds during tomorrow's discussions. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself deep in conversation with colleagues, discussing advancements in technology and the challenges of implementing sustainable practices on a global scale. Despite his focus, he couldn't fully shake the events of earlier in the day. He wondered if Emily had reflected on what had happened, if she had realized the implications of her actions. He hoped she had, not just for his sake, but for her own growth. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Emily was still struggling with the weight of the day. She had tried to carry on with her duties, but her mind kept drifting back to Marcus. She had Googled his name after their interaction, and what she found left her stunned. The articles painted a picture of a man who was not only incredibly successful, but also deeply committed to making a positive impact on the world. She felt a pang of regret and a growing need to make things right, but she wasn't sure how. As the night wore on, Marcus returned to his suite to prepare for the next day's keynote speech. He went over his notes meticulously, fine-tuning his message and ensuring every point was backed by data. His speeches were never just words. They were calls to action, designed to inspire and challenge his audience. He knew this conference was a pivotal moment, not just for his company, but for the industry as a whole. The next morning arrived quickly, the city bathed in the soft light of dawn. Marcus stepped onto the stage of the packed conference hall, his presence commanding yet approachable. As he spoke, the audience hung on his every word, captivated by his vision for a sustainable future. He was in his element, weaving together facts, stories, and actionable solutions with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime mastering his craft. When the panel discussion began, Marcus took his seat alongside the other experts, including Elliot Reynolds. As Angela had described, Reynolds was young and bold, his energy palpable. He spoke with confidence, making sweeping statements about the future of renewable energy and challenging the established players in the industry. While some of his ideas were compelling, others lacked depth, and Marcus could sense the room's mixed reactions. As the discussion heated up, Marcus chose his moments carefully, countering some of Reynolds' assertions with thoughtful, evidence-based arguments. The tension between the two was electric, drawing the audience deeper into the debate. Despite their differences, Marcus respected Reynolds' passion and saw echoes of his younger self in the ambitious newcomer. Back at the private lounge, Emily was watching the live stream of the conference on her phone during a break. She felt a strange mix of emotions as she watched Marcus command the room, his intelligence and grace undeniable. She realized how deeply she had misjudged him and felt a growing determination to find a way to apologize. But how could she? He was miles away, surrounded by people who respected him, while she was stuck replaying her mistake over and over. As the panel discussion reached its peak, Marcus delivered a final statement that silenced the room. His words were powerful, his vision clear, and his integrity shining through. The audience erupted in applause, the energy in the hall electric. Marcus glanced at Reynolds, who nodded respectfully, acknowledging the strength of his argument. It was a moment of triumph, but Marcus knew the story wasn't over. The real work would begin after the applause faded. Outside the conference hall, a message waited for Marcus on his phone. It was from an unknown number, but the words were unmistakably heartfelt. Asterisk, Mr. Bellamy, this is Emily from the airport. I owe you an apology. I misjudged you, and I deeply regret my actions. Thank you for showing such grace when you didn't have to. If there's ever a way to make it right, please let me know. Asterisk. Marcus stared at the message, the tension of the day finally giving way to something unexpected. He hadn't anticipated hearing from her again, and now he faced a decision. What would he do next? Marcus stared at the message, the weight of Emily's words sinking in. It wasn't often that people acknowledged their mistakes so openly, and while part of him appreciated the sentiment, another part questioned its sincerity. Was this an attempt to clear her conscience, or did she genuinely understand the deeper implications of her actions? Either way, he decided to let the message sit for now. He had other matters demanding his attention. As he prepared to leave the conference hall, Marcus was approached by Angela, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. You handled yourself brilliantly out there, she said, lowering her voice. But I thought you should know, there's been some chatter. Someone's been asking a lot of questions about you, trying to dig into your past. Marcus frowned, his mind immediately racing. What kind of questions? Angela glanced around, ensuring they were out of earshot. The kind that feels off. A reporter, maybe. Or someone with an agenda. They've been discreet, but word travels fast in circles like these. Marcus felt a flicker of unease, but kept his expression neutral. He had nothing to hide, yet he knew how easily narratives could be twisted. Thanks for the heads up, he said, his tone calm. Keep an eye out. As he left the venue and entered his car, Marcus couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wasn't just a coincidence. The timing was too precise, the questions too pointed. His phone buzzed again, this time with an email. It was from one of his company's legal advisors, flagged as urgent. The subject line read, *unusual inquiry. Need to discuss ASAP*. Opening the email, Marcus scanned its contents quickly. It outlined a series of requests for information about his company's financial dealings, all coming from anonymous sources. The language was vague, but the intent was clear. Someone was fishing for something. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. Was this related to the conference? To his growing prominence in the industry? Or could it be tied to something, or someone, closer to home? He couldn't ignore the possibility that this was personal, not professional. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Emily sat in the break room, her phone in her hand, staring at the message she had sent Marcus. She didn't expect a reply, but felt compelled to reach out anyway. Her thoughts were interrupted by a colleague entering the room, her voice tinged with urgency. "Emily, you might want to see this," the woman said, holding out her phone. On the screen was a news alert, the headline catching Emily's attention immediately. Business mogul Marcus Bellamy faces scrutiny amid speculative allegations. Emily's heart sank as she read the article, which was filled with vague claims and unverified sources. She couldn't believe how quickly things had escalated. Though the piece lacked substance, its tone was damning, painting Marcus in a shadow of suspicion. Emily couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt, wondering if her actions had inadvertently set something in motion. At his hotel, Marcus was reviewing the same article, his jaw tightening. He recognized the tactic. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to undermine him with baseless claims. What troubled him was how quickly this had surfaced, almost as if it had been waiting in the wings. He made a call to his public relations team, instructing them to address the situation swiftly and with clarity. Transparency had always been his approach, and he wasn't about to change that now. But as he ended the call, another thought crossed his mind. Who would benefit from this? The renewable energy industry was competitive, and his success had undoubtedly ruffled feathers. Yet this felt more calculated, as though someone wanted to tarnish not just his business but his character. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his suite, reflecting on the whirlwind of events. His phone buzzed again. This time, a call from an unknown number. Hesitating for a moment, he answered, his voice steady. "This is Marcus." There was a pause before the caller spoke. It was a woman's voice, quiet but firm. "Mr. Bellamy, I believe we have a mutual interest in uncovering the truth. You don't know me, but I know who's behind this." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" The voice continued, ignoring his question. "Meet me tomorrow morning at the coffee shop across from the conference center. I'll explain everything." Then, without waiting for a response, the line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, his mind racing. He had no idea who the caller was or whether he could trust her, but her words planted a seed of suspicion. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes, and this might be his chance to get answers. As the night stretched on, Marcus tried to focus on the work at hand, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the call. He didn't like being in the dark, and the stakes were too high to ignore. Whatever was happening, it was clear that this wasn't just a passing storm, it was a calculated move, and he was at the center of it. At the same time, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had played a part in whatever was unfolding. She decided to dig deeper, determined to understand the bigger picture. Little did she know, her quest for answers would lead her straight into the path of something far more complex than she could have imagined. Marcus arrived at the small coffee shop early the next morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The air was crisp, and the city felt unusually quiet. He scanned the tables inside, his sharp gaze searching for anyone who seemed out of place. Then he noticed her, a woman seated near the window, her dark hair tied back neatly, a folder resting on the table in front of her. She met his eyes briefly before looking away, as if nervous. He approached cautiously, his guard up but his curiosity piqued. "You called me," he said, taking the seat across from her. The woman nodded. "Thank you for coming. My name is Claire. I work in corporate intelligence." She slid the folder toward him, her voice low. "What I'm about to share will explain why you're being targeted." Marcus opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. They were detailed, with timelines, names, and connections he hadn't anticipated. Claire continued, "Someone is trying to undermine your credibility in the industry, but it's not just about your company, it's personal. The people behind this have ties to a competitor you recently outbid for a major government contract." Marcus leaned back, his expression hardening. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. "Let me guess, they're trying to discredit me to force a review of that decision." Claire nodded. "Exactly. And they're leveraging old business dealings, spinning them to look suspicious. It's all smoke and mirrors, but enough of it in the media can cause real damage." As Claire spoke, Marcus's mind raced. He was no stranger to cutthroat tactics in business, but this was a new level of calculated malice. Before he could respond, Claire hesitated, then added, "There's something else. The woman from the airport, the one who stopped you, might have been manipulated into setting the stage for this." Marcus stiffened. "Emily." Claire nodded again. "She didn't know it, but she was likely influenced by someone feeding her doubts about you. A subtle push to make her act the way she did." Marcus felt a rush of anger, not at Emily, but at the lengths people were willing to go. Why would they involve her? What's the point? "It's psychological," Claire explained. "They wanted to create a public moment, something that would raise questions about your integrity or your character. They were counting on someone snapping a photo or a video, something that could go viral and fuel their narrative." Marcus closed the folder, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for bringing this to me," he said finally. "But why are you helping?" Claire hesitated before answering. "Because I know what it's like to be targeted unfairly, and because the people behind this need to be exposed." As Marcus left the coffee shop, the weight of the situation settled over him. He knew he had to act quickly to protect not just his reputation, but also the integrity of his company. Back at his hotel, he convened an emergency meeting with his legal and PR teams, instructing them to counter the narrative decisively. He also made a call to Emily. When Emily answered, her voice was shaky. "Mr. Bellamy, Emily," Marcus interrupted gently but firmly. "I need to meet with you. There's something you should know." Later that afternoon, they sat face to face in the same lounge where their story had begun. Emily listened in stunned silence as Marcus explained what he had learned. Her eyes widened with every detail, and by the end, tears welled up. "I had no idea," she whispered. I thought it was my mistake, my bias. But now..." Marcus placed a hand on the table, his tone calm. "You made a mistake, yes, but it's what you do now that matters." Emily nodded, determination replacing her shame. "Tell me how I can help." With Emily's cooperation, Marcus and Claire were able to trace the threads back to their source, a rival executive with a history of underhanded tactics. Armed with evidence, Marcus confronted the individual publicly, exposing their scheme in a powerful press conference that left no room for doubt. The story that had been meant to ruin him became a lesson in resilience and integrity. As the dust settled, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened. The experience had been grueling, but it reaffirmed his belief in the power of truth and transparency. Emily, meanwhile, found her own path to redemption, using the lessons she had learned to advocate for fairness and equality in her workplace. But just when it seemed like everything had returned to normal, Marcus received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was unsigned, but the message was clear. "This isn't over." Marcus held the letter in his hand, the words lingering in his mind. "This isn't over." It was unsettling, yes, but he'd learned enough about resilience and perseverance over the years to know fear couldn't dictate his next move. He set the letter down on his desk, letting out a slow, measured breath. Whoever was behind this wanted him to be shaken, to second-guess his steps. But Marcus wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, he saw the message as a reminder to stay vigilant and continue building on the foundation he had worked so hard to create. In the days following the press conference, the media narrative shifted dramatically. Reports celebrated Marcus for his transparency and resilience in the face of attempted sabotage. The story became less about the accusations and more about the strength of his character. The support poured in, not just from his industry peers, but from people around the world who resonated with his journey. Marcus took the opportunity to double down on his mission, using his platform to advocate for fairness, integrity, and sustainability in business. For Emily, the experience had been transformative. She didn't just see it as a chance to make things right with Marcus. It became a catalyst for her personal growth. She started having tough conversations with herself, examining the biases and assumptions she had carried without question. She also took steps to improve her work environment, advocating for better training and awareness programs for her colleagues. It wasn't an overnight change, but it was a meaningful start. Marcus and Emily stayed in touch, their connection evolving into one of mutual respect. She would occasionally send him updates about the changes at the airport, and he would encourage her efforts. It was a small but significant reminder of how their paths had crossed in such an unexpected way and how both had grown from the experience. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to focus on his company and its mission. The energy and momentum from the conference were channeled into new projects that pushed the boundaries of renewable technology. His team expanded, bringing in fresh talent and ideas that reinvigorated their efforts. Marcus knew the work they were doing wasn't just about business. It was about creating a lasting legacy of positive change. Months later, during a rare quiet evening at his home, Marcus sat on the balcony overlooking the city. The lights sparkled like stars against the dark canvas of the night, and the air carried a sense of calm. His phone buzzed beside him, and when he glanced at the screen, he saw it was Claire. "Marcus," she said when he answered, her tone steady but laced with something deeper. "I thought you should know. We've traced the letter." He straightened in his chair, listening intently as she explained. The message hadn't come from the original instigator, but from a loosely connected individual who had a grudge against Marcus from years ago. It turned out to be nothing more than an empty threat, a desperate attempt to unsettle him. Marcus thanked Claire for her diligence and ended the call with a sense of closure. Setting his phone aside, Marcus allowed himself a moment to reflect. The journey of the past months had been filled with challenges, revelations, and growth. He thought about the people who had stood by him, Angela, Claire, his team, and the lessons he'd learned about trust and resilience. He thought about Emily and how one moment of misjudgment had spiraled into something neither of them could have predicted, ultimately leading to understanding and change. As the night deepened, Marcus felt a quiet resolve settle over him. The trials he had faced had only strengthened his commitment to his values and his vision. He knew the road ahead would have its own share of challenges, but he was ready. After all, the true measure of success wasn't avoiding obstacles, it was how you rose above them. In the end, Marcus's story became one not just of triumph, but of transformation. It was a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of humility, and the impact of standing firm in the face of adversity. For those who had followed his journey, it was an inspiring reminder that integrity always mattered, and that even the most unexpected encounters could lead to meaningful change. As Marcus closed his eyes that night, he didn't think about the threats or the challenges that had come his way. Instead, he thought about the future, one he was ready to embrace with strength, clarity, and an unwavering belief in what was possible.